View from the Gutters, Episode 72. Welcome to View from the Gutters, the comic book podcast where each episode we discuss a collected edition, trade paperback, or graphic novel, and then recommend and vote on the book for the next episode. Warning: the discussion portion of this show has massive spoilers for that book. On this episode, we discuss Mark Waid's Daredevil issues 1 through 10. And, to skip ahead to the recommendation section, skip to 113.17.
But don't, stress out about it, okay?
Don't stress out about it.
Joe, I will fucking murder you with your own entrails. I swear to God.
I'm going to do an ASMR reading. No, I'm going to do what I was going to do on the Point Now track, which is... I'm going to talk in my old-timey radio announcer voice.
WURB 95.5.
Do not do that.
We're here talking about Daredevil today. He's that rascally.
You need to up the...
do-gooder.
You need to go higher. You're still down here a little bit. You got to get up high in the nasal range. Welcome to the radio.
I saw it on the radio.
Welcome to View from the Gutters, episode 72.
73?
No, 72.
No,
last night we did 72 point now.
Well, you did it wrong because this is episode 72.
How can this be episode 72 if 2 episodes ago it was episode 70?
Because it was 71 and then it was 71 point now. I swear to God, I just put the episode up. This is episode 72 and I'm Tobiah Panchin.
This is episode 70 something and I may or may not be Joe Preddy.
Brant Eddie.
Kurotron 2000.
And I'm Kate Reynolds.
And we're talking about Daredevil, the Mark Waid run.
Actually, we're talking about what fucking episode this is, because I'm still confused.
I am too, because we did say last night, welcome to episode 72 point now.
Yeah, I listened to you say that, and you were wrong when you said it. And I put the correct episode on the title, and so did Chard when he edited it in the beginning.
Oh, that's fair.
Okay.
Can we go now?
No.
Can this be a thing?
The thing is that I haven't been on an episode with you in a little bit, and I'm just here to bust your chops.
You're being feisty. I don't care for it.
Fucking feisty. The vitriol. Everybody that listened to the episode that we put up today, I guess, knows that I'm full of vitriol.
Well, technically 2 days ago.
2 days ago.
2 days ago. I don't fucking remember anything. This whole weekend.
It's Wednesday right now.
You guys are in the future, and we really don't know what's going on.
See, this is what happens. This is what I tell people, that I need to be around you so that I can properly express your vitriol gland so that it doesn't build up and become toxic and kill you like a dog.
See, I don't know about that because in some ways I'm kind of concerned that you are the red flag to his bull.
That's true.
That his vitriol wouldn't build nearly so high if he didn't spend such highly concentrated periods
Kirby
of time
has
with you.
spent this entire weekend with me, and I've been pretty mellow. No, have I not?
She doesn't seem very convinced.
Slow head shake, not backing away, not making any sudden movements.
Well, okay. She's got no reason to come down on my side. She's my girlfriend. I mean...
Obviously, that would not engender anyone towards you in a positive way.
Clearly not. So Daredevil, the fucking book I've been trying to get picked for months.
Yeah, so...
I know, and we've had 3 different people on the show pitch it.
So, Kirby, you pitched Daredevil. Wait, would you like to talk about it a little bit?
Can I steal the mic for a minute?
I don't know. Kirby, are you okay?
Yeah, that's fine.
Okay.
Before we get too far into Daredevil, I wanted to do something real quick because I was asked to, and I couldn't be damned to type something out on Facebook in response to Brian.
Oh, I've been looking forward to this.
So I have a very short little monologue to give.
Go for it.
There is a preface to this monologue, and the preface is as follows. I have mixed feelings about higher education, and I want this very clear because what I'm about to say may sound strange. And I know I've brought it up in the past, and it's mostly so that people understand that I have spent some time and energy looking into this, both from a viewpoint of what it might take to get educated at that level of higher education in comics, and also because I did do that on both an undergraduate and a graduate level. But I have mixed feelings about higher education in general, even though I work in the damn industry. So one day I might expound on those. There's a lot of different things to talk about regarding doing college-level work and comics. Here is just the very brief outline that I think might help Brian specifically because he just wanted some pointers and some notions. Maybe at some point, I think, Joe, you recommended that maybe we do a back matter, and I can kind of break this piñata open because as I'll demonstrate here in a minute, there's a lot of different things that you can talk about. My experience on the undergraduate level is that, at least when I was still an undergraduate, comics were at this point where it was getting some basic classes lined up in the same way that you might think about film theory. A faculty member might choose a selection of titles regardless of content and talk about the aesthetic purpose of a comic book. Wouldn't talk too much about thematic content. It was about exploring the art form itself. On a master's level, I've been very blessed to have a lot of faculty who are willing to kind of break that can of worms open. And then there's been some escalating levels of scholarship, not only about the art form, but about the content therein. So I think the thing that makes comics hard and fun on an education for higher education is that it is an art form that very much has strong ties to some of the content that initially led to its wide-scale distribution. And because of some of the cultural things that happened in the United States in particular, United States comics have some very crazy things about both the art and the content that need to be kept in mind. Not that film or any other type of art are lacking in those sorts of subtleties and complexities. But my experience, especially on a graduate level, is that a lot of faculty don't know those pieces of history and concept. So you may end up having to do a lot more work proving your point before you can even talk about these higher level concepts that you're expected to approach in graduate work, which is hard when graduate work in general tends to be much more aggressive about doing things like keeping you within a defined limit, keeping you trying to narrow down your expertise, right? Undergraduate tends to be broad, graduate tends to be narrower, and PhDs tend to be excessively narrow to the point where you're talking about only one very nuanced thing as part of that thesis process. But the problem is, with comics, you've got the conversation about what the medium itself is capable of, and then depending on what particular content you're talking about, there are some very strong things that need to be addressed about those content. One of the big ones that came up for me was superheroes and mythology. Now, on a basic level, right, it's very clear. There are superheroes. There is myth. Hercules, Thor. Superman's a lot like a mythic character. But when you do graduate level mythological work, this isn't just Hero with 1,000 Faces. This is Levi Strauss and getting really into, Joseph Campbell. What people sometimes don't realize is that the reason he was such a rock star was because he managed to make a field of study that is very dense and hard to navigate, easy to understand. And so if you're going to talk about superheroes and you're going to try to address mythology in superhero comics, that is a lot of work. There's a lot to look at. There's a lot to disassemble because you not only have to have a strong basis in myth, but you also have to have a strong basis in what comics are doing and what the historical origin of that content and its influences were. And the reason I make such a strong point about this is because there are some books out there that were made by folks who are interested in this concept. For instance, Christopher Knowles is the name that comes to mind. I believe his book is called And Our Gods Wear Spandex. He draws a strong parallel between occultism, mythology, and a couple of other things, but because it's clear that his background isn't as an educated person, as an academic, rather, in mythology, he makes some assumptions that you wouldn't necessarily make as an academic. And I found that to be the complicating factor with comics in education and higher education in general. To be an academic with this content and this art form requires a lot of extra work, which can be really rewarding. And if you have a passion for it, that's great. And as more time goes by, more people are doing it. So then you have more stuff to kind of piggyback off of, which is the one advantage you have working in a lot of other content areas or areas of study. But it's just kind of my one, my one warning. Is that be very mindful of what faculty you have who are going to, and how accessible they're going to be. They're just like those of you out there who would try to do academic work relating to genre fiction and addressing the deeper content or artistic merit of genre fiction, like science fiction and fantasy novels. You will run into the same kinds of anti-intellectual or intellectual elitist arguments against comics as being an anti-intellectual pursuit. When realistically, there is a lot to unpack. True, there are some comics that are nothing better than a Michael Bay movie, and there are some that are like pretty robust treatise on man, nature, the history of all of our collective unconsciousness stuff, blah, 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 blah. So that's my really rough, short diatribe about it, and we can certainly unpack that in much greater detail. The other thing I will say is it's very, very helpful to know a lot about Carl Jung, because a lot of his concepts, which inform a lot of mythology in general, get used a lot in taking a look at how the imagery of comics, regardless of content, has kind of a unique opportunity to affect the way people think and consider the art. That's what I got.
Cool.
So, yeah. Well, comics, I mean, I think we talk about this a little bit when we talk about the nature of comics and the fact that, I said this last night, we've said it before, 80-90% of people, when you say comics, are going to think superheroes. They're not going to think about things like Joe Sacco or Marjane Satrapi or Mouse, which are not only emotionally powerful works, but very intellectually fulfilling. And the fact that comics and serialized graphic art in that format and in that medium is only now being, in its, in the form of the stapled pamphlet, is only now coming into kind of a light where academics are even going near it, and it's very similar. It has a very similar arc to like things like not only genre fiction, but like the pulp fiction of the 20s and 30s, where these detective novels that for years academically people just kind of were like, whatever, and now are finally getting the dude they deserve, where people are looking at them with an analytical eye.
Yeah, I mean, there has been there has been a small kind of, campfire in the darkness movement. The Comics Journal actually is literally a comics journal, like an academic journal in a sense. Like, they have people who are grinding their gears in the background, really trying to talk about these higher academic concepts as they relate to comics. And sometimes mainstream comics will break into that dialogue. I've certainly seen it.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
But you're right. Like, that's the problem, is that comics have such a weird, especially American comics, and that's part of the other challenge, is that comics are taken on a different level even by intellectuals of non-American origin,
in Europe
because,
and in Japan,
they have a greater cultural tradition in other countries. So it can get to be a really big, soupy mess. And I guess that's the biggest word of caution, is define very clear goals about what you want to get out of studying comics and why. Like, for instance, where a lot of mine came through was ultimately mythological studies dovetailing into communication theory. Mm-hmm. So I just focused a lot on what were core concepts that American mainstream comics were kind of projecting into the mass consciousness, and how did that inform how people thought about certain notions and ideas.
Right.
There's a lot I could say about a lot of other things, but that's where I had to narrow my focus, because you only have so much time in grad school, and if you want to get good grades, you need to actually focus on something.
Right.
So,
well, and we'll get a back matter put together as soon as I'm waiting on a piece for my laptop.
Yeah, I think that there's quite a bit of an interest amongst the hosts at having a more in-depth conversation, both on this subject and related subjects.
I have a bibliography of like 90 sources, 100, it's like 7 or 8 pages long of articles, books.
And I also just want to throw it out there to anybody who's interested in the subject. There's a website that I feel does a lot of really good, deep, insightful articles about the art of comic books and kind of their greater significance, which is Seek Art. It's a sequential art, kind of Seek Art, however you would pronounce that. It's
can you spell it?
SEQUART.com.
Yeah, that sounds right.
Possibly .org. I'm really not sure off the top of my head.
It might be an org, but
yeah, they do a lot of great articles. I really enjoy their stuff, and you should go check them out.
Absolutely.
So now, can we talk about Daredevil?
So now that we've had this wonderful, incredibly dense opener, let's talk about funny books.
Yes, Kirby.
Yes.
You just reread Daredevil for the second time?
Yes.
What did you think about it? What were your insights?
Well, I mean, I knew I liked it, and I do this horrible thing where I'll read a book and I'll remember what happens in it for like a week after, and then I'll go away and I'll just remember like the feelings I had for it.
Oh yeah,
So,
absolutely.
Yeah,
I mean, I notice new things every single time that I read a book. Mm-hmm. And sometimes it's the same thing that I recognized before, and I'm like, oh yeah, that thing. But a lot of times I'll get more out of it because I'm seeing things at the beginning that are only significant later, and so get some more depth out of it. But there is definitely a process where it's like, Oh yeah, that cool thing. What was that cool thing? Oh, it was really cool. Whatever it was.
Yeah,
So
there's definitely something that happened.
What was a cool thing that you noticed this time?
I think one of the things that I noticed more this time around was like more of the art aspects. Like when like Matt is talking, sometimes his shadow will have like the Daredevil horns on him, or like in the part where he's on the rooftop after he talks to, what's her name, Kristen, for the first time.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah, and he's like falling and he's like taking his clothes off. He's like, I'm not Daredevil to her, and then he just kind of like falls off the roof and is again.
That's a very kind of dreamy, almost romantic thing where he's like falling and the clothes are almost washing off of him.
Yeah.
It had a very kind of romantic feel in my mind this time reading it.
Yeah, well, I think that the whole thing is kind of, I think I said this when I pitched it, but it's like all very serene. Like he's not really like troubled by being Daredevil. He just is Daredevil, and he like with his
he's in the closet about being Daredevil.
Yeah, well, no, it's not necessarily that. It's like he just is, and like people are like, "Hey, you're Daredevil, right?" And he's like, "No, not really," and then moves on. But like his whole thing is like he just kind of goes through life. He uses his powers when he needs to, and is just kind of very pleasant about it. Like he's not like.
Well, I think that's actually a really interesting point about Daredevil and who he is and the way that he operates. That you have other heroes like Spider-Man, let's say, or Captain America, or I don't know, Green Arrow. Mm-hmm. And they're kind of like going about their day-to-day thing, and they just like they are who they are. I mean, Spider-Man has his spider sense, but that's a very passive thing. Like he can walk down the street and he's just Peter Parker. Mm-hmm. But Matt Murdock is always Daredevil. He is always using those senses. He is always immersed in his very unique perspective, which is something that's very significant for him as a character, and something that I think that they do a really good job of playing up in this series. And there are, I think, 2 or 3 different artists who work on just the issues that we look at in the first volume. The best of whom I think is Paolo Rivera, who repeatedly does this really awesome thing where he's got all of these little panels where he's kind of showing the way that Daredevil is perceiving the world.
Yeah.
And something that I noticed that he does a lot is that there will be 2 panels and his like head extends across both the panels, but the gutter goes right across his eyes. And you see that motif. You see that motif several times, like where they're showing like he is not seeing, like his eyes are not part of the picture, and it's all his other senses that are in play. You know, he's smelling things, he's hearing things, he's feeling things. And I don't think a lot of other artists or writers doing Daredevil have paid that much attention to just the way that he exists in the world.
Mm-hmm. Now, I wanted to touch on something a little bit because you had mentioned he's always Daredevil. You know, even when he's Matt Murdock, he's Daredevil.
Yeah.
And I think he does a really good job of like mixing, like when he's on the case as Daredevil, it's also the case that he's working on as a lawyer. Mm-hmm. So it's not like he's trying to lead 2 lives. It is the same life. He's using one to augment the other.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so that's like the exact opposite of, you know, Peter Parker being a high school teacher. That's completely opposite from his Spider-Man thing.
I think that's part of what I finally got over my anti-Daredevil elitism, because for a long time I was like, why would I want to read Daredevil? It's just like a cheap Batman mixed with Spider-Man thing. Oh! I know. And I think that is true. Like, he's not Batman. He doesn't have any police scanners. He doesn't really have any... Like, he has no clue what's going on except what he runs into in his normal life or what happens to happen near him when he's out and about as Daredevil. And I guess in that way he's sort of similar to Spider-Man, but Spider-Man has so much stuff intrinsically built into the drama of his life versus the nature of his work, whereas for Matt Murdock, those things are kind of all jumbled together. I mean, I guess they are for all the Marvel characters, especially like when we were talking about Superior Spider-Man, half the drama is that Otto is going back and trashing Peter's day job as much as he's trashing, you know, his relationship with the city and establishing a new relationship with the villains in a much more brutal way. I think that there's like there's a word I'm trying to find. There's almost like a quaintness to the way that Daredevil operates, where he's just kind of like, well, this is what's in front of me, and I guess I'm going to deal with that, and I'm really not going to think past that too much. And not in a way that's like, he doesn't have forward thought. He's just kind of like, this is what I have. This is my priority. I will deal with these other things when they come to me.
Well, I think that the Batman analogy is interesting because I read Frank Miller's Daredevil for the first time last year, and he really changed the character of Daredevil. You know, before Frank Miller comes on, he's much more of a Spider-Man-esque, happy-go-lucky superhero character, and Miller takes him to a very, very dark place. And that is in late 79, 80, 81 that Miller is doing that. And it's after that that Miller goes over and does his Batman work. And I think that he was taking the ideas that he developed on Daredevil first and then applying them to Batman. Batman, took a big spike of popularity around that period. He got more of his modern definition compared to the old Silver Age kind of Adam West Batman. And so people remember those Batman characteristics as like, oh, Daredevil is just a ripoff of Batman, because Miller had kind of test-bedded those ideas, and everybody who's done Daredevil since then has kind of been playing off of what Miller did until Waid.
Well, I would take it one step further. I don't think they've been playing off of what Miller did. I think they've been trying to write Frank Miller's Daredevil, and unsuccessfully. As much respect as I have for people like Brubaker and Bendis, they didn't take the character anywhere new. And like, my biggest problem, I've been a Daredevil fan since the mid-90s when I picked up, it was the Man Without Fear miniseries. Funnily enough, written by Frank Miller with John Romita Jr. did the pencils on that book. And it's a 4-issue miniseries, and it's a retelling of Matt Murdock's origin. And it's fucking great. And like, my biggest problem about that is that Daredevil is defined not necessarily by his skill set or his power set, but his name, Daredevil, he is the man without fear. And Batman is fucking ruled by fear. His whole life is about fear. The reason he can't have a decent fucking relationship with anybody, the reason that the first thing he does when shit happens to him is push everybody he cares about out of his life, is because he can't deal with those relationships because he's scared of losing them. And Matt Murdock and Daredevil hold on to those fucking relationships with every fiber of their being. And that's the difference. Like, you want to talk about fucking strong moral fiber? Like, fuck Batman. Daredevil's got him beat on every level. Daredevil, yeah, they both run into burning buildings, but the difference is that Matt Murdock believes in what he does in his day-to-day life, and he will have that. He knows how important Matt Murdock is. Because he is always switched on. Like, he will go. That's why, I mean, in the second or third issue, he talks about how he can't just go from point A to point B. He goes outside and he immediately hears people getting mugged, banks being robbed, fires, all this shit that he can go and help out at. And he does. That's what he does. That's who he is. And so,
well, I think that Waid does a very good job of playing that up and talking about, who is Daredevil.
Yeah.
And I love the moment in the very first issue where he's at the wedding and the Spot is attacking, and he's like, I'm just going to say that I know that a thing and see who jumps.
Yeah.
And that is an awesome moment because he could have like totally been out on his ass.
Yeah.
Throwing that out there, and he was right. Like, he doesn't have that fear, and he plays off of those abilities that he has.
And I mean, from that moment into the moment where he's fucking throwing down with Captain America and holding his own, right? I mean, like, the fact that he walks out of that confrontation at all, much less by saying, that thing is beautifully balanced. That was the highlight of my night.
That thing is like a Stradivarius.
Yeah, I mean, like, and he can use it. I mean, he uses it the way Cap uses it. Like, you don't see people just fucking grabbing Captain America's shield and bouncing off of buildings with it and fucking, like, throwing it around the way they fucking do, because you can't just do that.
Yeah, I mean, they don't talk about it nearly as much anymore, but it used to be a big thing, like the fact that Captain America can do the things that he does with his shield because he is the super soldier. Like, he has not just the strength, but like the spatial awareness and the tactical sense to be able to do that. And that's something that very few people in the Marvel universe are able to do.
Yeah. I mean, Spider-Man can't catch that fucking thing.
Although it has become sort of analogous to, very few people can beat Lady Shiva in the DC universe, except now, 10 years later, a lot of people can, because now a lot of people, not a lot, but a stronger handful of people have caught and used his shield in the last 10 years than like the 30 years before it, because in the last 10 years alone, Daredevil, Hawkeye, but not Spider-Man, and that was me eye-rolling, because Spider-Man is more powerful than a Hawkeye.
We all know this.
I don't care what you're saying in your heads, those of you who are listening to me. Spider-Man is more powerful than Hawkeye.
See, Hawkeye is a ripoff of Green Arrow, who is the best superhero in the universe.
Well, and it's explained in New Avengers that the whole reason that happens is because Clint Barton studied with Steve for so long, and Steve personally trained him in hand-to-hand combat, and blah, 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 blah.
But still,
I was just making a Green Arrow reference being the...
But Captain America's shield has been dwarfed. Yeah. It became a measuring stick for this person is badass if they could catch Captain America's shield, and so a bunch of people caught his shield as a very quick shorthand for this person is a badass.
Well, whenever you set a benchmark, right, it's like I always think the very first role-playing game I played, my GM said, there is always somebody bigger and better than you are. Like, no matter how good you get at this game, no matter how high level you get, there's always somebody that can kick your ass, right? And so you have your latest Shiva because you need that measuring stick, because you have her there expressly because you need to have people that are better than her so that you can show how good they are. Because saying one of the best in the world, it's like, well, how big a pool are we talking about? Are we talking about 2 million people? Because that's a big fucking pool.
Joe, stop hitting your mic.
I'm sorry. It's too close to me. It's violating my personal space.
Well, I think that this is an interesting conversation generally, because without putting any spoilers on it, we just watched the season 4 finale of Game of Thrones, and there is a fight between two characters who will go unnamed. And a lot of the conversation around that fight has been, I'm surprised that this person was able to beat this person. And a lot of people have come down on the position of it's very much an any given day kind of thing. Like, this person is having a good day. This person is having a bad day. Like, this person's horse.
Well, it comes down to one of those people
or whatever,
made a stupid fucking mistake because they thought they were much more badass than they actually were.
Well, neither of those people were wearing helmets like they should have been.
Well, that's the other thing.
Well, there's a reason for that, but that would be spoilers.
And I don't want to get too deep into the Game of Thrones specifically, because that's not what we're talking about on any level.
That's a different podcast.
The point that I'm trying to make is that people like to get into these dick measuring contests about, like, this character could beat this character, could beat this character.
You mean like when Joe used to be on the Batman can beat Superman train, and I had to fight with him constantly about it? Oh, I'm sorry, what?
That was a long time ago, and you promised me you'd never bring that up again.
I never promised.
Especially since, like, as long as I've known Joe, he's said, no, Superman wins.
Yeah, that's me. That was my influence.
Brand has been a very good influence on Joe. But the point is that
we all know Batman wins.
When it comes to these characters, like, it is very much an any given day kind of thing.
Yeah.
That Daredevil could beat Captain America if it came down to it under the right circumstances.
Right.
Well, and yeah.
Depending on whose name is on the cover of the book.
Hawkeye is a badass in his own right.
Oh, absolutely.
I mean, I think the thing is that you don't establish a measuring stick unless you can show how much bigger the other measuring stick is, right? Like, and so I still will say that while Hawkeye may have caught the fucking shield, Daredevil would kick the shit out of him, because that's just the way it is.
Daredevil didn't train with Captain America.
There's a hierarchy. No, he trained with the fucking hand.
Well, he trained with Stick.
Stick, who was an offshoot of the Order, or whatever it was.
Whatever.
But I have a big... Yeah, I mean, there are characters... Like, even when we talk about the Green Arrow Hawkeye thing, because we have a friend that's fucking worships at the Hawkeye altar, and, like, we used to give him shit all the time about, oh, his costume's wrong, it should be green, blah, blah, blah. But, like, one of my biggest peeves in comics is to be like, oh, that character is just like a shoddy this character. I'm like, no. And especially with Daredevil and Batman, where their core concepts are so completely on an ideological level separate and different.
Wow, I don't know about that. I was actually just getting ready to say that I think the whole thing that makes them different is that you characterize them and you create substance around them. At the core of them, it's two guys dress up as scary figures and pounce on people in the night. It's how you characterize the individuals in the suits outside of that make them uniquely different. One is blind, and one has a handicap but superpowers. The other one has a keen intellect and a driving will to do whatever. And then you build from there. Alfred versus Foggy, the entire Bat family versus now the Marvel Knights, the street level heroes of the Marvel universe. Like, I think that the thing that distinguishes the two of them is not that their concepts are that different. It's that they are inherently different personalities. I think that's why everybody was trying to riff on the Frank Miller stuff for so long. And I think some of it's actually pretty good. I like Smith's run on it. I like Brubaker's run on it. I think that in some ways they did better jobs than Miller did, which makes sense because it was 20 years later. They had a lot of time to think about it. But
I don't know if I'd say better, but I would say
I have an inherent Frank Miller
like
vibes.
on the same level in a different
right. I think they certainly pull on some threads that the Miller run put into play, right? Or the entire 20 years.
And I enjoy the Brubaker run, and I enjoy the Bendis run to some extent. I think what I mean is that at the end of the day, Daredevil is motivated to help people. And Batman helps people, but is motivated by imposing his will on his city. Now, he justifies this through certain ways, but at the end of the day, like, the reason that he's borderline psychotic. I mean,
all of these guys are borderline psychotic.
No, I mean, it takes a certain kind of psychosis to dress up as something else and then go out and like get shot out and punch.
It takes a certain kind of grown male to put on spandex and
but
not just male. There are women who do that too.
I really feel
to fight
like
crime.
I think that people want to lump them together because Batman lost his parents at a young age. Matt Murdock lost his father at a young age.
They're both most of the time street level heroes. They both deal with kind of
I know, and I agree.
There are more parallels than that. Like, and I mentioned the Miller thing. One of the things that he does in Miller's run is he shows up and he talks to the reporter Phil Ulrich, and then he does the Batman disappear.
Ben
Urich. Yeah. And he does the Batman like disappear thing.
Yeah.
Like, there are a lot of specific beats that happen with Daredevil that have been replicated with
I
Batman
feel that
as
it's worth mentioning because we have talked about both Frank Miller's Daredevil and Frank Miller's Batman, and it's important to note that Frank Miller even says in the introduction to his Dark Knight books that a lot of the stuff is stories he wrote for Daredevil that they would not let him publish because they said, no, that's too much like Batman.
Exactly.
And he just saved it and then was able to write Batman, so he had it. So, I mean, a lot of, you can make the parallels between Frank Miller's Daredevil and Frank Miller's Batman. Well, he wrote them basically at the same time.
That's true. And they also do something in this Daredevil series that I love, that Marvel seems to be doing as a regular thing, where Marvel characters will make references to DC characters. Like, at one point he's swinging, and I'm not sure if it's in this volume or if it's actually in a later issue, but Daredevil is swinging across the city and somebody goes, hey, it's Red Batman. To the point where you have to kind of imagine that DC comics exist in the Marvel universe.
No, they absolutely do.
In the Marvel universe, comic books are about DC characters.
No, and it was even, I forgot to say it on the episode, but actually Peter Parker makes a reference to Batman.
Oh, yeah.
In this, or not Peter. I guess it.
I know I've seen a panel where they're like, it's Spider-Man sitting there and he's like, it's me. I'm Batman.
Yeah. And yeah. And I think that's really cool.
Yeah. I never fail to be amused by that.
Well, and it makes you feel like they are in your world. It's not like, DC Comics is very much, this is Metropolis, this is Gotham, this is Star City, whereas in the Marvel Universe, it's very much this universe.
Or New York. In the Marvel Universe, it's just poor New York.
I was actually trying to think of other places that have things going on in the Marvel Universe. It's all New York.
The West Coast.
It's New York. I was like, the West Coast. I said
not any specific city.
Said, no, it's
the West
just
Coast.
the West Coast. I said
Well, sometimes
same thing.
Arizona.
Well, Avengers Mansion was in Florida for a long time.
And
or
the
something
Great
like
Lakes. Also the Great Lakes.
Well, hey.
Lots of Marvel events happen in other real places. Latveria, Madripoor,
That's
Genosha.
right. Very good.
Asgard.
Asteroid M. But hey, Marvel's got your back because they started just a few years ago a 50-state initiative to make sure that every place got loving supervillain-based horrible destruction right at your doorstep.
That's awesome.
Because, apparently they needed to export chaos and bedlam from New York.
New York. But I want to bring this around to something Kirby said earlier, and not just because I enjoy hearing her speak about things, but because I'm totally going to get a hug if I let her talk more.
Is that a euphemism? I'm sorry.
No, it's not. We've been together for like 6 years now.
Kirby subvert the trope.
So what
What does that mean?
what I wanted to ask is, you were talking about how you kind of forget and you're left with how you felt about it. And so I'm interested in that. Like, I want to know what this book makes you feel like.
I just remember that I liked reading it a lot, and that I liked the way that the character was presented, which I talked about earlier, where it's just kind of like he's kind of just doing his thing, like there's not like a ton of drama where it's like, oh no, this person knows who I am and now I need to go hide somewhere, or oh no, that's like big.
Yeah,
yes.
I think that's what makes this such a fresh take on it, is that I think where I get worn out with superhero comics sometimes is that notion of like, okay, well, Kevin Smith comes in and it's like Daredevil's girlfriend leaves him, and then all this horrible stuff happens, and then Brubaker picks it up, and then more horrible things happen, and it gets darker and darker and darker. This book assumes that pendulum has to swing back the other way at some point. And so now we've got a Daredevil who, 10 years later, after girlfriend's exposure, being possessed by an ancient ninja spirit and taking over parts of downtown Manhattan as part of the head of a large international ninja cabal, which actually was kind of cool.
Oh, those wacky ninja
I
cabals.
hate when that happens.
And I think one of the things that it comes down to is much like they did with the new Hawkeye series, is you have to show that your characters change over time.
Right.
And I actually wanted to talk about that. If I'm not interrupting you, Brant, did you have a great point?
Oh, my cap was just that this is a character who's kind of reached the point where it's like, you know what? I lived through all that crap, and I'm just going to, this is what I am. Most of my ducks are in a row, and you know what? Being Daredevil's kind of actually fun when, all that other stuff is not happening, and it's not. So, hey, and... So yeah, this is a person who went through that bottom. They hit rock bottom, and now he's kind of got the joie de vivre back. And
yeah, and this was the first Daredevil. Well, it's the only Daredevil thing I've read.
This was actually the first Daredevil thing I ever read.
Yeah, and I don't know about. I guess I kind of knew about the darker side, so it was kind of surprising to me when I read it that he wasn't super dark and gritty and just everything was awful. It was kind of like, well, here we go. This
Joe,
is what
do
we're
you want
doing.
to sing the Everything is Awful song?
Everything is awful.
Everything's not cool if you're part of a team.
Sucks when the
Anyway.
kingpin hates you.
I did want to talk about this in the context of Marvel Now, because this book actually started before Marvel Now was actually a thing. It got a new, not actually #1, but relaunch where it was Marvel Now Daredevil, when Marvel Now became a thing. And I like to think of this book as kind of the poster child for what Axel Alonso has done with his tenure as editor-in-chief of Marvel, and kind of the first salvo of him going this is what I want Marvel Comics to be like, and what Marvel Comics have become a lot more like in the years since. And I think it's really interesting because it plays in the Marvel universe. It makes references to the things that exist in it, but it's not belabored by continuity. It's not wallowing in all the things that have happened before. It references, things like AIM and the Hand, and Daredevil's had all of these things in his life, but you don't necessarily need to know a lot about them in order to be able to read and appreciate the book. And it's setting a very kind of fun, lighthearted, but serious tone where he really is a superhero in the way that Daredevil hasn't really been a superhero in a very long time.
Well, I think in comic books there's a tendency to string people along with melodrama and plot twists and constant reversals and switcheroos and all this shit. And the thing I like most about this, because while I'm thrilled that Marvel is doing some really great stuff right now with like Captain Marvel and Miss Marvel, and they're doing a lot more for the Marvel ladies, which I think is great. They're putting out a lot of great shit, like Silver Surfer with Dan Slott. Mike Allred is awesome. They're also kind of doing some shady shit where every so often we're just going to reboot a book and give it a new number one for no fucking reason. We all know what that reason is. We all know that you put a number one in a cover and it's going to sell a few more issues. And that to me is fucking shady. It's underhanded and it exemplifies the worst part of the industry. Having said that, Mark Waid writing Daredevil was like a breath of fresh air. I mean, it was really... It's Mark Waid doing what he does best, which is kind of like looking at the core concept of a character going, this is what this character needs to be about, or at least this is what I see in this character that I want to write about, and then writing about it. The stakes are appropriately high, but at no point are you like, this is like fucking slogging through molasses to get to the next issue. Like, sometimes that's great. Sometimes you want that really super dense, like super packed feeling where like there's a lot on the line and it's super tense, but I don't want them all to be like that. And it felt like for a while, and this is like, that describes almost the entirety of the New 52, which is really sad to me because this is what superheroes should be about. Like,
let's not talk about the New 52.
No, we've been actually doing really well staying away from it. And I only bring it up because when I read this, I feel like this is what superheroes should be aiming for. Like, anybody can read this. Audrey loves this. It's appropriately serious at times. There's appropriate stakes. They're high. You feel like something is on the line, but you never feel bogged down. You never like reading some of Brubaker's stuff. I'm like, God, this is fucking bumming me out. Like, I don't want to read this right now. It's good. It's heavy, but it's heavy.
Well, I think that's a lot of what's behind my personal feeling that I don't know that long form publishing without strong arc consideration is a good idea anymore.
Yeah.
Because like the arc for Daredevil before this was Shadowland, I believe.
I think so.
Where he was possessed by an ancient ninja basically and takes over, becomes the head of the hand and does all this stuff. That was a way more weird supernatural take and involved lots of other strange things that is kind of been at the margins of birds in the background, has been at the margins of Daredevil's continuity, but hasn't been something that's been looked at as much as like the hardcore gritty crime noir aspects where it's street level and it's about,
right,
all the stuff that was betraying him and all this stuff. And I guess for me, the big thing is that it's not like Daredevil went from being a bad book to a good book, in the sense that I liked what happened with Daredevil for the most part over the last few years. Because the other thing to keep in mind is that before Waid took over Daredevil, there also was a big strong push. Like he was put on the new Avengers.
Yeah,
he kind of like broke out of his shell on a lot of different fronts in the Marvel universe. I think because as a whole, the universe was adapting and changing to some of its heavy continuity laden stuff, which, while there was a lot to digest, I think Marvel had actually done a pretty good job of saying, here's this giant event. It affects everybody on every level. Here's how. Like even Fear itself, which I thought I was going to despise, I actually had a lot of fun beats in it. And coming out of that stuff, some of these third-tier characters or second-tier characters, wherever you want to put them, that were not A-list, kind of got elevated and given a little bit more to do in the greater universe. And so I guess all I'm trying to say is I think that this is a great different take on Daredevil, and I think it just shows that with the right kinds of writing teams, you can take a character kind of all over the place within its concept, and still have a lot of interesting stories to tell.
Well, I think that's really what's best about Mark Waid. And Mark Waid is somebody who is never at the top of my list in terms of my favorite writers, but he is somebody who I always consistently enjoy the things that they do. And I think that his real talent is taking a character or taking a group or a situation and really going like, what is what is fun about this? What is cool? What is the most interesting thing? And really getting down to the heart of the character and producing a really good story about
what is the set of circumstances in which the Spot is a formidable opponent?
Yeah, right.
Well, and I think
like
that's
he's very, very good at reducing a character to its core elements and going, what's cool? Like what's cool about this? What can I build out of this?
I really enjoy shows like Game of Thrones and Luther and Breaking Bad and House of Cards, which are all not happy sunshine shows, right? And in fact, watching them a lot of the time, I feel like I should just not have feelings anymore because they're just emotionally difficult to watch. I enjoy the shit out of those shows, but I don't want that to be
everything
for 10 fucking years, right? Like sometimes I want Arrested Development or 30 Rock. Sometimes I want something silly that's going to make me laugh. Sometimes I want fucking Scrubs that's going to give me a little bit of both.
I watched Oz with Brandt like 10, 12 years ago, and that show fucking
scarred
broke me for a decade.
And the thing is that this, like, Brubaker's run, Bendis's stuff, much more in the vein of, like, Game of Thrones, Luther. This is Scrubs. This gives me the laughs and the enjoyment I want, but it also kind of has some of those better moments.
Yeah,
and
it's a much more upbeat book.
Yeah, but there's still and it's not in but I think at this point it's pretty fair knowledge that, it's been on the internet. So, spoiler, if you don't want to hear it, if you haven't read beyond this book, then please lower your volume for a few seconds. The volume when Foggy is diagnosed with
cancer.
It's cancer, right?
It's a specific kind of cancer. I don't know which
and
kind.
That whole scene right there, that could have been done any number of ways that would not have been as powerful and hard-hitting. And I think there's an extra weight to it just because the nature of the book is Matt being like, I've been through some shit lately and I'm kind of, that's been what it is. But I want to live. I want to do this. I want to be who I am. And that's what I'm going to do. And I think that's an incredibly powerful character moment for him.
Absolutely.
Rather than and it's just nice. I get tired of seeing people are always beating the shit out of these characters. People are always beating the shit out of Peter Parker. People are always beating the shit out of poor Matt Murdock. I like these characters when they're doing their thing and they're not getting the shit beat out of them. And they're being who they are.
But who they are is magnets for being shit on.
And if you want to do that every once in a while, that's fine. But I
actually kind of agree with Joe. I think that there's a tendency among too many comic writers to go, I'm going to break this character down so that I can build them back up.
Yeah.
And that's cool now and then, but you don't want that to be every single story. Sometimes you want that story where this character gets their crowning moment of awesome and they just get to be cool for one fucking minute.
And everybody wants that moment. Everybody wants to write the triumphant crowning moment where Daredevil snatches his life back from the Kingpin and is once again the hero that Hell's Kitchen deserves. But when everybody writes that moment, it ceases to mean anything, right? Sometimes you have to be the fucking guy that writes the moment that Daredevil, does something really
has a ham
cool.
sandwich,
or that he has a ham sandwich. But that's the thing. Done right, that ham sandwich can be twice as fucking good as the 23rd triumphant moment.
Well, I'm sure we could probably dissect the hell out of this, and it's not something we should get too far afield, but I think part of it is it feeds itself right. Now you've got a cabal of writers who grew up with a bunch of people who were writing all of these fantastic moments, and they were like, well, I would have done this slightly differently, but I think that notion is still pretty cool. In some ways, this book, in my mind, is a little bit of a reflection of Mark Waid himself. Yeah. Mark Waid has nothing left to prove in modern American superhero comics. He's done what he's wanted to do. From that, I think he's a writer now who's let's just fucking have fun with it. I got nothing to lose.
Yeah.
So he can afford to write. He's so Mole Man shows up and I don't know, stealing bodies. What do you guys think about that? And everybody's like, well, yeah, Mark, you make it sound really interesting. He's like, okay, cool. So, yeah. Daredevil's going to go on a raft ride. There's going to be Moloids. It's going to be something out of the Pirates of the Caribbean ride from Disney.
One of my favorite stories in this book is the issue where it's just him and the kids. Out, their bus crashes and they're out in the woods in the snowstorm and they have to get back.
Yeah.
That's a great fucking story. And there are a lot of writers out there who could not write that story with half the power that Waid manages to do.
My favorite part of this series was when he ran into Elektra in the playground and had a hand-to-hand fight dressed as Matt Murdock in front of all the kids. Oh, wait. I'm sorry. That was a very bad movie.
Happened.
That was a dream or something.
I was like, wait, did we read the same book?
I'm going to have to ask you to leave for making that reference. I can't.
I made it sardonically. I am allowed to stay.
I did love the moment where he and Black Cat are making out and Spider-Man's just sitting there looking.
This is my supervillain origin.
Yeah.
And I think that's what it is Mark, and he does this with The Flash too, but he does this with most everything he writes. There is an understanding of what the character is more than what he wants the character to be. And when he wants the character to be something, he's not, and especially at this point in his career, he's got the wherewithal to do it, but he's not afraid to take as much time as he needs to get the character where he wants them to be.
He is a sophisticated enough writer to know how to take the time to do the things that he wants to do without forcing them.
And there's an understanding there. I think that we're kind of starting to finally break out of this. For a while there were a lot of people writing comic books that clearly hated superheroes. And Mark Waid, I don't think has ever been one of those. He's always got,
No.
it's the exact opposite, right? Like the man loves superheroes. He understands.
Although he's not unwilling to be critical. I mean,
No,
Kingdom Come is a very big kind of...
Oh,
Isn't he the one who's doing Irredeemable?
Yeah.
and
Which I-
Incorruptible.
Well, they
desperately,
ended,
I know.
Yeah, they're done now.
A couple of years ago, like July 2012 or something.
And that's kind of the thing is that there's an understanding there of this very basic level of how superhero works, which is what allows him to tell this story, and also a story like Kingdom Come, and also a story like Empire, which maybe is not as successful in all the ways that Kingdom Come and this are. Or The Flash,
He's actually picked up Empire again.
Yes.
It's going as a digital only through his website. I think it's Thrillbent.
Yeah,
Yeah, which is
where
great.
he put out Insufferable, which was a great comic as well.
So if you listen to our episode on Empire a shit fucking long time ago, and
That was the first Brand episode.
you liked Empire. Well, no, it wasn't the first because it was the first Brand pitch that we talked about.
Oh, it was. No, it's true.
If you liked Empire, it's back. In
The
digital
Empire has come back? Wait, no, that's not what I want to say.
It strikes back.
So Kirby,
Oh, okay.
what was your favorite moment of this comic? And I'm not going to make a Game Grumps reference like Joe would if he asked that question.
What would the reference be? Oh, wait.
I think your favorite moment. Top 5 favorite moments, go!
Pick my next in Spice. Let's see. I liked a lot of the book, and I think my favorite story arc or issue probably was when he helped the kids in with the bus and everything, just because it was something that was different. There wasn't any violence. There wasn't a bad guy. Well, there wasn't a bad guy. It
Man
was just
versus nature.
Yeah, it was just man versus nature, and he's having to use what he has available to him to save these children from a burning bus, which is kind of cliche, but and he does it in a really good job, and the art in it I think is really good too. It's another one of those things like I was talking about earlier where sometimes you see him and his shadow has the Daredevil horns. It's he's doing it, and he's got his Daredevil uniform's kind of coming out of his clothes that he's wearing as he's doing it, he's being Daredevil and helping these kids,
Yeah, there's a lot of good art that runs throughout the series.
In that issue where at first he pulls all their hats down over their eyes so they can't see that.
No, they're all blind. I'm not sure how.
Are they all blind?
Yeah.
Okay, that wasn't expressly said in the book.
Yes, no, it is.
I didn't get that.
They're
Joe
the
had to
school
tell me.
for the blind. Is the school he volunteers at? It's very clearly said.
Then that was set up before this arc.
No, he says it right at the beginning of the arc. I'm just saying that if you guys aren't going to fucking read critically, why the fuck? No, I'm just kidding. I felt that Chard wasn't here, so somebody needed to say it.
Yeah, if you look at the very beginning of the issue, they're in the bus, and the bus says on the side of it, Crestskill School for the Blind.
Oh, whoops.
And then he also says that he
Okay, I didn't read the side of the bus.
No,
I
but
apologize.
Well, whose fault is that?
He says it.
I didn't
Comics
think
is
he
a
did.
visual format. You need to be aware of the details.
Because he said the Cresskill School is where he volunteers at. I don't think he said for the blind.
I think maybe you're supposed to pick that up.
Well, I think no.
Okay.
However, let's give Cade his due. I do believe you are correct that it has been mentioned previously in Daredevil continuity. So, had you been a longer-standing Daredevil reader, you also would have been informed vis-a-vis that.
That could very well be.
So,
yes.
I think that it's fair that it wasn't necessarily immediately obvious to you, even though you should have read the damn bus.
God damn it, Brant! Why do you have to
Yeah,
be so
he's
reasonable
pulling
and
those
tolerant?
hats down because he's.
I thought that's why you guys
warn-
wanted me on here, was to be reasonable and
He
tolerant.
pulled. He's
No,
trying,
I wanted
'cause it's
you to
15
agree with
degrees
me.
outside. They're in the Catskill Mountains.
I
Which
thought
really,
he was
I mean,
pulling him
that's a
down
bad
so
on me
that
for
they didn't
expecting
see
that.
him put on his Daredevil stuff.
No, that's what Kirby also thought that, but
It's
Because
The
he
first
does make a
Daredevil thing I
reference
ever
to
read.
the fact that he had to put on the gloves because otherwise his hand would be too cold to function. So, like, you know that there's a moment he had to change into his Daredevil outfit.
Yeah, well, I
as
mean,
opposed to
his clothes were all ripped up.
he's
Yeah.
wearing it underneath. Yeah, he's wearing his Daredevil costume underneath.
Well,
It's kinda
but he
like-
didn't have the gloves and the boots and the mask on.
No.
Yeah, actually, when he's having the kids pull it down, there's exposition. He's talking about we can't stay, we have to get right out of here. And then as he's pulling the hat down on the kids, 15 degrees, if that, and falling. So he's pulling all the hats down on the kids, and then he puts on his own mask.
Yeah.
So I think that they're trying to show at that point that he's doing that primarily to keep them from
Freezing.
freezing.
Okay. And I probably would have inferred that if I had realized they were blind.
yeah.
Maybe.
I just wanted to point out one other moment when we're talking about really good ones, and it's the end, I think, of issue 4, where he's standing at the window with the other blind guy who overheard the Liberian
Yeah.
Oh, and there's
conversation,
all
and
those
there's all the
lasers.
laser
Yeah.
sights all over them. And it's a really awesome shot, and it's a moment that you could really only have with Daredevil.
Right, because anybody
else would notice all the
Yeah.
fucking red dots.
And I think I called him Pablo Rivera before, but
Paolo.
it's Paolo Rivera, and also Marcos Martin is the other guy who does most of the
Yes.
penciling for this series.
Cano.
Yeah, Cano was on at least one issue.
I was going to say this earlier. I would love to know more about. I have a sneaking suspicion that they intentionally. Sorry, I have to backtrack slightly. It is not uncommon for there to be filler artists on a run. What is not common, however, is that those filler artists match the style
so
and
well.
and selection. So I wonder if it's that they chose these artists because they were very similar to Paolo's work, or if they specifically told them, we want you to ape Paolo's style as closely as
Well,
possible to maintain the visual
But some of the
consistency.
issues even have out of the 3 or 4 pencilers on the same issue.
Yeah.
So they're working together.
Right. Well, I mean, and there's a lot that could have been about it, as far as if Paolo fell behind or however it is. I'm kind of curious about how strongly when Waid and Paolo pitched it, did they say the visual thing needs to be consistent? Because there are some books that you'll go and read and it'll be a completely different style for a fill-in issue, and it's like nobody really seemed to care about that part.
Yeah.
Well,
but
there
they
is
seem to have a
actually-
really strong concern with
Continuity.
the
and
visual continuity.
Honestly, the first time I read this series, I didn't notice that there were different artists.
No, I didn't either.
I mean, I'm a bad person. Before I started doing the podcast, I really did not pay as much attention to the credits as I do now. And I think that is a really important thing to do. And you do learn a lot from paying attention to that and really like noticing who is the penciler, who is the inker, who is the colorist on this series.
Well, I'd still think you're a bad person, too, if that makes you feel any better.
Well, and that also helps because sometimes people like
I'm
Mike
not even gonna
Allred
respond.
will be credited, and then you find out that he's only inking that issue, not penciling it like he normally does.
Right. Well, and I remember when we were reading Avengers Forever, I think I said something in the beginning of that one because we had talked a lot about that being written by
Written?
Kurt Busiek?
by Busiek, but Roger Stern actually did. Busiek only did plots. Stern did the writing.
Right.
or at least majoritively from what I understand. And it's like, I specifically, when I was looking at the credits before the show, I was like, oh, I really want to make sure and mention that Roger Stern was important because he works with Busiek in that capacity often, and because that guy deserves as much props as Busiek does for laying that whole thing out.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and especially when it comes to comic books, like I think there's always a question of who did what. Like, how much is the writer saying, like, these are the layouts I want this particular shot, like, I want to do this thing, and how much is it the artist or a collaboration between the two of them? Like, who is specifically picking which parts of the story to be the specific way that they are?
Yeah.
And that's very rarely clear unless you're actually going in and, like, reading interviews and stuff where they talk about it.
Yeah.
And there was a really interesting book that I got at one point that I think was recommended to me by Brant called Comic Writers on Comic Script Writing.
Yes.
Where it was, I think, 10 or 12 different comic writers, where it was an interview with them and then an example of their script along with a couple of pages depicting that script. And they all have very different styles of writing and different amounts of give and take on how they work with their artist. And there was one person, I can't remember who it was, who specifically talks about, like, when I sit down to write a book, I get in touch with the artist and I'm like, what do you want to draw? What are you interested in? And if they're like, I want to draw a helicopter, I figure out a way to put a helicopter in that story.
Right.
Kevin Smith does that too.
Well, and especially in a medium that's rife with not giving people credit or not giving them the credit they deserve. Mm-hmm. And in an industry filled with that kind of, people just passed over because they didn't have the name or because they weren't aggressive enough at self-promotion or just because they worked with the wrong people. I think, like, making those kinds of statements and like being sure and as meticulous as you can be about who's doing what and people getting the credit that they get, I think that's hugely important. Well, it is to me.
You're also talking about a medium where for decades and decades, creators weren't even credited.
Oh, no.
Certainly not on the cover, and a lot of times not even necessarily on the story. Not all of them.
It would just be like Marvel Comics presents Daredevil.
Or even worse, Stan Lee presents A Tale of the Spy. It's like when he hadn't been writing for fucking, 20 years. At that point.
I can't remember specifically who it was, but there was just a recent example where somebody was fighting to have certain contributors credited on the cover.
It was colorists on the cover.
I believe so, yeah.
Yeah, we actually posted it to the Facebook.
Yes, you hit your mic again. Thank you.
I hit the pop filter.
It vibrates.
It can vibrate my ass.
Probably.
Well, I'm sure you'd like that. Anyway, I wanted to say my favorite part of this book was...
Yes, absolutely, Kate. I'm sorry to have not gotten to you sooner.
It's cool. My favorite part of this book was actually when he is with the blind kid.
Can I have you pause for 1 second?
Yeah.
Joe, fucking stop messing with it.
I am not talking. I can touch my fucking mic stand if I'm not talking. Char told me so. So there. Also, I know it annoys the shit out of you, and I haven't seen you in like 4 days.
I'm sorry, Cade. So what was your favorite part of the comic?
Okay, so when he's got the blind kid and he's recreating the scene because it's easy to forget how smart Matt Murdock actually is. And I think that scene really drove it home. Like, this guy is really smart. Like,
No, it's not just that he's smart. It's that he thinks about the world in a very specific way.
Yeah. And he can use the way he thinks to be smart.
No, absolutely. Like he sees that I shouldn't say he sees things. He perceives things in a way that very few people do, and that makes him think in ways that other people don't think, and that gives him an advantage, not only in the courtroom, but as a superhero.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And that's weird that you say that it's easy to forget, because to me that's the whole point of Daredevil is that, he's a lawyer. He's a brilliant fucking trial attorney. Like, he always has been.
They have made that specifically a point of this
He's
series.
a dirty, dirty cheater.
But...
For justice.
Well, although...
I mean, it takes more than just being like, you're lying. Like, you have to come up with a legal defense.
I know.
Don't just sell him short, Brandon.
In the past, they have talked about that sometimes the reason Matt wins cases is because he's charismatic, and it's Foggy who knows what he's talking about, not necessarily Matt.
Well,
and that kind of plays down his level of...
Foggy is a brilliant legal mind, but like Matt is a great lawyer. Like that's, I mean,
yeah, but that you don't have to be specifically smart to be a great lawyer.
Yeah, it's the two of them together in a collaboration.
We're very sorry to any lawyers who are listening to this show.
Well, no, a lot of lawyers I know are smart. I'm saying, but you don't have to be a good lawyer.
Right. They don't necessarily have overlapping skill sets.
I mean,
there's a unique set of skills there.
Insert Jeff Winger reference.
Yeah,
here.
right. Like, this is not... I'm really going to argue with you about this later, but it's not an argument I feel like having on air.
I feel that in the past, Daredevil, how smart he actually is has been played down. And
right. Well, in the same way that Peter Parker's intellect sometimes gets played down by certain writers, like they don't, like I may have even mentioned it on the show before. One of my favorite segments, it's just a visual joke out of Future Foundation, is all of the various members of the Future Foundation are sitting and Reed Richards is giving a presentation about all the alternate Reed Richards, and they're talking all this stuff, and Peter Parker just says, oh, we could also do this, insert crazy scientific theory here, and the entire room just turns around and stares at him, and they're like, and then the kids start whispering, oh my God, Spider-Man's smart. I had no idea that Spider-Man's smart. And he's just like, that's it. I am leaving. I've had enough of you people. But it's like, yeah, because because of the nature of Spider-Man's problems, he got built up a lot in the last couple of years, but you don't necessarily get a lot of good tangible examples. I mean, even in this series, to actually push back at Joe directly, Foggy and Matt get into a fight. Because Matt's very, charismatic, off the cuff. He's like, oh, I just thought I could take it. And Foggy was like, if you would have screwed that up, we would have been screwed in this case. Because you didn't have the technical footing for what you were attempting. And there have been those kinds of dialogues between them before. So I think you're absolutely right. That sometimes Matt is as given to impulse and charisma, and he uses his power and doesn't think through the technical parts, which doesn't necessarily mean he's not smart. And in fact, that's not the case. Matt is capable of thinking about things and perceiving them in a way that's very unique, but...
You might even say he's fearless.
Yeah, I mean,
absolutely. I'm just saying that in the past, they have played that down. And it's,
exactly.
It's refreshing to read this, and you're like, okay, yeah, Matt is a smart guy. I forgot about... Yeah, when this and this, when your default story is Daredevil drops from the ceiling and he punches the guy in the face and Bullseye throws a thing. It's like, how often is Matt Murdock's intellect being prominently displayed? I dodged the knife. Good job, smart guy.
Maybe that's just the way I tend to think about characters as they are, as I perceive them as they're meant to be. Right, like to me.
What does that mean? I perceive characters as they're meant to be. I mean, I perceive them the way that I think that there's correct way to perceive them.
There's a correct way to perceive fucking characters, all right? Like, I've read multiple iterations of Matt Murdock's origin story. He was a brilliant student, so, I always think of him as brilliant. Now, different writers are going to write him different ways because you need to make
a lot of writers,
plot contrivances.
A lot of writers don't write Captain America as the master tactician that he actually is. And this is something that Joe and I were talking about last week, is that it's refreshing sometimes to read a comic where they really, specifically it was a Captain America comic we were talking about, where they actually showed that, yes, this guy is brilliant.
My problem with Captain America is that I don't feel like he necessarily gets depicted as the knock-kneed, New Deal lefty artist that he was before he was Captain America. But maybe that's just me.
My problem with you is that you ever feel the need to speak at all.
Wow.
Whoa.
And on that note...
Toby is at the control board. Your track could just disappear.
That is true.
I haven't gotten to give him shit in a really long time, and so it's just...
Are you happy? Are you satisfied? Does it feel good for you?
My future brother-in-law graduated from high school this weekend, and Kirby's all Kirby's 3 grandmas were in town, plus her aunt and uncle.
I see how it is. You had to be on your best behavior this weekend, and now you're acting out.
I had to be on my best behavior, and I cooked all weekend, and it was just very tiring, and I'm still kind of recovering. I got up early this morning, so
it's tiring to be the good future.
Yeah, and also it's just
person-in-law thing.
I haven't gotten to be
the
very
future
profane
Mr.
lately.
Turbotron 2000.
It's a big role that it's a very important one. And anyways, the thing I'm saying is
recommendations.
Yes,
Yeah.
let us
I didn't
move
get
on
to
to
talk about my favorite part.
Well, what's your favorite part, Joe?
Where I threw Toby out the window.
I meant the favorite part of the book, not your favorite part of tonight.
No, my favorite part is definitely the fight with Captain America. I mean, no bones about it. Like, it establishes what's going on. With very little screwing around, and it establishes what Daredevil is and what he's going to be, and I love it.
I also really liked. I think it's actually the last issue of what we read. The last issue of the not the 10.1, but the 10, where out of the 5 bad guys, or maybe it was in the 10.1.
The last issue, number 10, is him coming out of the Mole Man caverns.
Okay, maybe it's 10.1 then, where he actually shows up at the 5 bad guys and says, "Why haven't you attacked me yet? Here's what we're going to do. You threatened me, blah, blah, blah. Here's me drawing first blood, putting all that shit on the internet." Out of the,
I think maybe that was the 10.1.
It was the 10.1. Yeah. But you only get one, Cade. You have to make one or the other your favorite. They can't both be your favorite.
Oh, well, I mean, my favorite is the setting up the blind kid with the whole computer thing and what kind of tea was it.
Okay, you can't talk about anything else then. Those are the rules.
Right.
Oh, Joe.
I've gone mad with power! Mad, do you hear me?
Then if I can't talk about anything
Joe's
else, it's recommendations time.
Podcast over. Fuck you, Joe.
All right. Cade, what would you like to recommend this week?
Wait,
no?
I have a favorite part.
I thought you said your favorite part.
What did I say was my favorite part?
I don't fucking remember.
Yeah,
What was your
because
favorite
I
part?
Where
didn't
he was
say it.
possessed by a demon and taking over Manhattan.
Yeah, I said that was a good story. That wasn't my favorite part of this. Claw. I have a big thing for Claw.
Claw was
Your fucking
awesome.
your claws and your kangs.
I know, I'm a big K guy.
Claw is awesome.
So look, it's informed by my early childhood, or actually it was in high school, but I used to have, and I wish I could remember, so not only did Claw show up in Thunderbolts early on, which I of course adored that series, but one of the most prominent stories that stick in my mind is this whole thing where it was horribly drawn, like in the 90s style. I think it was a Fantastic Four now that I'm on the subject. But anyway, there's Claw and Black Panther and all this stuff, and like Claw like creates an entire army of vibranium ghost animal things. So like I've had a big thing for Claw forever. And so him showing up in Daredevil was just like, yay!
No, I'm with you. Claw is one of those characters that gives me a very warm, fuzzy feeling because I'm like, Claw's awesome.
He feels like a very classically 80s Marvel villain to me.
I wonder when he was first created.
Probably
It
the
was
60s.
Yeah, 60s or 70s.
Okay, I probably shouldn't say 80s. I should say classic. A very
I would have to
classic
check my
Marvel villain.
Marvel
Crazy.
Masterpiece Series 1 to find out.
Crazy German.
Not your handbook to the Marvel Universe?
No, I don't have an updated.
What kind of fan are you?
A box
The
fan?
kind that should be moderately responsible with his funds and not drop every piece of cash he has on every new iteration of a book.
Fair.
Brant speak good.
That's the kind of fan.
I think
he'd
you
be.
mean Brant speak well.
No, Superman does well. Wait.
Me and Bizarro and bad. Recommendations?
Yes, recommendations. Cade, what would you like to recommend?
Okay, so when I was reading this, I got thinking about other Daredevil runs, specifically Kevin Smith and Joe Quesada. And I was thinking there was a Joe Quesada book I reread recently that was kind of infamous when it was coming out, but then really fell under the radar. I mean, one of the reasons it did was because it took so long to come out, and Joe Quesada was taking so much crap for it about like, you're not setting a good example for your employees. Your editor-in-chief, you can't be doing this stuff. And so this book was kind of tainted from day one, but it's interesting because I actually like it, and that is called Nyx, written by Joe Quesada and drawn by a couple of different artists because they had to replace the first artist whose contract ended after the first year. Even though it's only 7 issues, it took almost 2 years to come out.
How do you spell that?
NIX?
NYX.
Or NYX, that's right.
And
okay.
Some people call it NYX instead of Nyx because it's actually short for New York District X.
I read the very first issue of this when it came out, and then just completely fucked off and didn't read any of the rest of it.
Well, the second issue didn't come out for 4 months after.
That's probably why. So what is this comic actually about?
This is actually about homeless young girl mutants, and it's actually the first comic book appearance of X-23, who was in Avengers Arena that we briefly talked about.
We've mentioned it a few times.
A few episodes ago. Yeah. Well, specifically, I think the prequel to it was being recommended, and we took a minute and talked about.
Well, it's Avengers Undercover now, and I think Shard
recommended Arena.
Yeah.
He
pitched Arena.
Post Avengers Forever.
Indeed.
Okay. Because I know that he did recommend Runaways, and when he was recommending Runaways, we were talking about Avengers Arena because many of the characters came back.
Both good series.
Yes. So this is the first comic book appearance of X-23, and this series was actually originally, it was an idea that Joe Quesada and Brian Wood came up with to launch what became Marvel Max. Is they had sat down and said, we want to launch an adult run for Marvel, and what can the first book be? And I mean, Brian Wood later took a lot of that stuff and made demo with it, but some of the leftovers went into this book. So it was originally going to be that, but then it became something different. But yeah, so it's about homeless teen female mutants.
In New York City.
In New York City. Yeah, this book actually shed more light on District X that came about during the new X-Men, which is basically Chinatown of New York City, but for mutants.
Mutant Town.
Yeah.
District X.
Yeah.
Cool.
And so, yeah.
Anything else that you wanted to say about it, or just it's good?
I like it. I actually haven't read the sequel because I didn't realize it had actually come out, but apparently it came out a couple years ago called Nyx A Long Way Home, and I was thinking if we picked it, we could do both this and the sequel. So this is 7 issues and the sequel is 6.
Yeah, we could totally do both.
But it was originally going to be an ongoing series, but then with the whole...
Joe Quesada being Joe Quesada.
Exactly. It was basically, okay, this arc is over at 7, and you're not putting out the book anymore.
Probably a good choice.
Yeah, so, but, I don't know, it was something I reread not too long ago, a few weeks ago, when I found my comics, and I liked it.
Cool. Kirby, what did you bring?
Well, I hope you guys don't hate me for this, but
I already hate you. I don't hate you.
I read Deadpool. It's a trade I have called Head Trip, and
which Deadpool is this? Who's
it's
the
Merc
writer?
with a mouth. Wait, hold on. I don't know who writes it actually.
Because there have been a bunch of Deadpool series.
This is just one of the, I think, miniseries.
Yeah, it's just like the whole thing like ends and stuff. But essentially what it is it's Deadpool, and then like zombie Deadpool's head ends up in like Deadpool's universe.
Oh yeah, Headpool.
Or Headpool, they call him Headpool. And they have to go through the different like Marvel universes to like bring him back. There's like one where it's got like Lady Deadpool, and then there's another where he's like a drill sergeant, and it's
nice.
Yeah, I mean,
Crisis on Infinite Deadpool.
It's the basis of the Deadpool core, I believe.
I thought it did, but I wasn't going to say that because I wasn't for sure on it. But yeah, I like it a lot because it's a relatively quick read, and it's got a lot of, I want to call them one-liners, but it's more like one-pagers, where it's just like a page is just hilarious.
Nice.
And yeah, it does a lot of what I like about Deadpool, which is where he just really doesn't care a whole lot, and he's like partnered with another Deadpool that doesn't really care either. Like there's a part where Deadpool's just like, I'm hungry, so I guess I'll bite this dinosaur, and now it's a zombie. Whoops. And then they have to like fight it. So, yeah.
An adequate description of this entire book.
Yeah, that's pretty much it. And of course, Deadpool is like super cool with like his swords and stuff. So
Wacky hijinks starring Deadpool.
Yeah,
and
exactly.
Deadpool and also Deadpool.
Yeah, and this
starring Deadpool.
This also has the funniest Deadpool moment ever, which I'll tell you about if you read it. So
nice.
Yeah, that's
awesome.
my pick.
Cool beans. Mm-hmm. Joe, what did you bring?
So, Frank Miller recently did an AMA on Reddit, which was fucking hilarious. In between being a shitstorm of people calling out Frank Miller on some of his more obvious flaws as a writer and human being, there was a lot of self-aggrandizement by Mr. Miller himself and a bunch of other stuff. So and I just read it and I laughed pretty hard because it was everything I wanted it to be. But I was kind of sitting in front of my bookcase, or standing in front of my bookcase, didn't really know what to bring. And then I was like, I know what I'll do. I'll troll everybody and bring Sin City.
My God.
Because we haven't talked about it, and we've never even recommended it before. And this is Frank Miller's stuff that he did for Dark Horse, the original Sin City. It's now being marketed as The Long Goodbye, but originally it was just...
Wait, wasn't it The Hard Goodbye?
Or The Hard Goodbye. But it was just... It was originally appeared in Dark Horse Presents. And it's the story of Marv, who's a ne'er-do-well who gets involved with this beautiful woman that he meets in a bar, and he wakes up next to her and she's dead. Why am I fucking like, I should have just been like, Sin City, we all know what that is. Next, because we all know what it is, right? It's like,
I've never actually read Sin City.
Me either.
Sin City is,
don't want to.
Like most
Not
of Miller's later work, very...
Are you going to vote for it, Toby?
It's interesting because it juxtaposes this kind of really incredible art style, which is just very like, it's black and white. And by black and white, I mean it is fucking black and white. And there's a lot of use of negative space, and there's some really incredible stuff artistically in it. And the story it tells is kind of ultra noir, violent story of revenge. Unfortunately, there is a lot of that kind of Miller brand misogyny and a few other problems with it. But at the end of the day, I love Sin City. Like, this is, to me, if he had stopped after Sin City, I would have been totally okay. Because I would have been okay remembering him for writing Sin City.
I will grant you that his art is very, very strong, especially in this.
And I mean, just like his dialogue for the most part is incredible. And his story, like, say what you will about the man, but he's got a great sense of like of story beat. You know, the story has a really great progression and all the story beats are there. You know, like I said, it's problematic. Most of Frank Miller's work is that especially his independent stuff, but like everything is there and it's a really cohesive story. And it's one of the best examples of like modern noir storytelling that I can think of. So I thought I'd pitch it. I don't expect it to get picked because we just talked about Dark Knight Returns like 6 months ago, like 3 months ago. And
one never knows.
It's kind of hard to rebound. But I thought I'd bring it and throw it out there because it hadn't been recommended yet. So, and it's, at the end of the day, it's important. And I mean, I love it for all its problems.
Speaking of recommendations, I will note, and I got to double check this, but I'm pretty sure that as of last episode, we had filled up every letter in the alphabet in our recommendations list with Zot finishing out the letter Z. So, hey, go us.
Start
awesome
over.
little factoid. Yeah, show canceled. New show. Got to start all over again.
We do, but it's all good. But yeah, so Sin City, it's like my favorite diner, right? I know that maybe it's not going to pass the health inspector, but I don't care. I go there anyways.
That's a really good analogy.
On that
I'm an
note,
analogy man. That's what I do.
Brand?
I brought Christopher Moeller. I think it's Moeller. JLA: A League of One, which is a story that was written and drawn / painted by him about ancient prophecy involving a dragon gets told to Diana. So because she wants to make sure that the Justice League doesn't die, she kicks the shit out of all of them and then goes and takes on a dragon.
Cool.
It's pretty darn awesome.
This sounds like a movie I want to see.
Yeah, it's got a really interesting visual style because Moeller's got kind of almost a lifelike style painting. Not quite Alex Ross, but not quite anything else. But it just, for me, it's a book that always has stood out because it's, I think, a great example of a Wonder Woman story where she's front and center, where she kind of gets to take the lead. I think has some really interesting beats in it. It's got kind of a fun, weird, like little sword and sorcery aspect to it, which doesn't get brought in enough from the Greek myth side of Wonder Woman as much, although that's actually been one of the strongest things of the current New 52 is Wonder Woman and that stuff. But
I think it's actually Moeller.
So yeah, anyway, it's a beautiful book. I worry that actually I have kind of rose-colored glasses of it that I think really highly of it, that maybe folks won't find it as enjoyable, and that is actually one of the reasons why I recommended it, because it was like, I really, really enjoy this book, but...
Well, I'm kind of the same way with Nick's. Like, I enjoy it, but I don't know if you guys are going to, if you pick it.
So, yeah, that's about all I have to say about it.
I've definitely felt that feeling before. So this week, I'm bringing back a book that I recommended once before. It's one that I really enjoy, and it's called Gunner Krieg Court by Tom Siddell. And this actually appeared originally as a webcomic. It's actually still an ongoing webcomic, but you can pick it up in print from Archaea Press. They put out some very, very nice hardcovers, as Archaea Presses want to do. And this is a story about a girl named Antimony Carver, as she begins school at a boarding school called Gunner Krieg Court. And it's her having a series of kind of, I want to say almost Harry Potter-esque sort of mystical gothic adventures with ghosts and spirits and magical things happening. And, it's a really well done, really fun story with a lot of great female characters. We just did Rat Queens last week. The Point Now went up the day that we're recording this, so I just listened to that. And all the talk about Rat Queens got me thinking, like, what other stories do I have that have really good female leads? And this is actually one of my favorites.
This is a quick interruption. Trendsetters, by the way, View from the Gutters. All this talk about Rat Queens and then the announcement that it's going to be turned into an animated show.
Oh, yeah. I was very pleased at the coincidental timing of that.
Trendsetters, that's us.
I want to know, what did you think about my perfect idea ever?
What was your perfect idea?
The Archer Rat Queens animation hour.
That would be pretty great. I'm not gonna lie, that would be pretty awesome. Although I think Archer's getting a little long in the tooth.
It is, but
it's not. It never will be. Stop it.
No, I liked the last season. I loved it.
I just binged watched it over the last 2 days. So
nice.
I'm a fan.
Excellent. So yeah, Gunner Krieg Court. It's weird. It's a little bit different, but it's a lot of fun. It's an all ages book. The art starts out a little bit rough, but it gets a lot better very quickly. And they just, do lots of really cool, fun things. And it's, basically think like Girl Harry and Hermione, also girl, like running around science Hogwarts investigating ghosts and monsters and crazy fun stuff. And being best friends and having adventures with their schoolmates.
I mean, I'm not going to lie. Science Hogwarts sounds pretty good.
It's pretty great. And I know for a fact that Audrey loves this book.
Yes.
So if you have a 12-year-old out there and you want to get her hooked on comics, GunnerCreekCourt.com. Free to read. Awesome series.
All right. It's time for the moment of truth.
Cade, what are you voting for?
I really want to read that Wonder Woman book. What was it called?
A League of One.
Is it a Wonder Woman book or is it actually a JLA book?
Well, I mean, it's technically a JLA book, I guess, although the whole premise is that she beats up the rest of the JLA, so they're there.
It is a JLA
They don't have as much
book.
of a
But
speaking
it sounds like a Wonder Woman book, even if it's called a JLA book.
I just mean that it says JLA on the cover.
Yeah, I mean, technically the title does appear to be JLA, A League of One.
Okay.
Okay.
So JLA League of One, that's what I want to vote for.
Cool. Kirby?
I think I'm also going to vote for Wonder Woman because what I read of Wonder Woman I like, and I should get more in there.
Nice. Joseph?
We've never talked about a Wonder Woman book, so it was a foregone conclusion that I was going to vote for Wonder Woman.
All right. Looks like we're reading Wonder Woman. Just for the record, Brant, what would you vote for?
Nix.
Would your vote to matter?
Nix.
Okay.
Nix.
Well, I'm just going to vote for Sin City, just so that Joe can't say that I didn't.
I wouldn't have blamed you for not.
Fine, then
But now
vote
you
for
can
Deadpool.
blame him for being the only one who did.
Actually, no. I also was very interested in the League of One, so I'm going to vote for that too.
This sounds like an awesome premise, and why have I never heard of it before?
Because Wonder Woman does not get good press.
She doesn't.
She fights a fucking dragon. This is right up my
everybody
alley.
talks about, like, what does Wonder Woman do? What does Wonder Woman do? They've constantly been producing Wonder Woman stories, and you don't hear about them.
Does. Yeah, that's. I agree. Her PR department sucks, and since her PR department is fucking DC Comics, that should tell you what I think about them these days.
Indeed.
So an army of one, a league of one.
Yeah, JLA, a League of One. Next week. And we'll see you guys next time.
We love you.
Thanks for listening.
We love you.
Bye.
Bye.
Stop hitting the fucking mic, Joe.
Thank you for listening to View from the Gutters. I hope our recommendations have inspired you to go out and find some new comics you'll enjoy. Join us next time for a discussion of our selected title, but like every week, we encourage you to read all of the recommended books. In the meantime, please leave us an iTunes review. It really does help new listeners find the show. You can also like us on Facebook, subscribe to our YouTube, and follow us on Twitter at ViewFRTHGutters. Feel free to email us at contact@viewfromthegutters.com. Please send us any questions, comments, or recommendations you might have. Be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel as we post new videos every week. And thanks again for listening. And as always, keep reading.